Hey guys, tonight we begin with the tragic and often overlooked lives of the lovers of Zeus, the infamous king of the gods, wielder of thunder, and let's be honest, ancient Greece's most problematic boyfriend. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Europa never asked to be part of a myth. She was a princess of Phoenicia, just a girl, really, picking flowers by the sea. The day was warm, the sky harmless. No omens, no warnings, just sunlight glinting off the waves and the laughter of maids in the grass. Then came the bull, massive, gleaming white, with horns shaped like a crescent moon and eyes that seemed too calm, too intelligent. She didn't know it was Zeus. She only knew that the creature knelt before her like a gentle dog. She stroked its neck. She giggled. It nuzzled her hand. Europa, so young, so curious, climbed onto its back. And the bull ran, not just through the meadow, but into the ocean, into the salt and the foam and the endless blue. Her laughter turned to screams. The shore vanished. No one could reach her. No one even knew where she went. She held tight to its neck as waves rose and the sea widened like a closing mouth. When they landed on Crete, it was too late. The bull transformed, not a beast at all, but a god, Zeus, naked in his power and pride. There was no consent, no conversation. She was raped by the king of the heavens and left behind with nothing but grief, confusion, and, eventually, sons. Zeus gave her gifts to make it seem fair. A bronze robot to guard her, a magical javelin, a hunting dog that never failed. Tokens of his divine affection. But he never stayed. He left her in a foreign land to rule a kingdom she didn't ask for. Her name lived on, yes. Europe, the continent, bears it still. But what about her voice? Her mourning? Her home she never saw again? Europa's story isn't just about a girl stolen by a god. It's about the thin line between worship and violation. About how the powerful rewrite stories to make horror sound like romance. They carved her name into maps, crowned her as queen. But they never asked her if she wanted any of it. Europa disappeared into legend. But she was once a daughter, a sister, a child by the sea, and she never went home. Leda was not a girl in a meadow. She was a queen, a woman of power, grace, and poise, married to King Tyndareus of Sparta. Her life was structured, ceremonial, dignified. But even queens aren't safe when Zeus desires something, or someone. One twilight, as she walked along the riverbank alone, she saw a swan crash into the reeds, pure white, feathers wet, trembling as if wounded. It looked helpless, pursued by an eagle. Instinctively, Leda reached for it. She cradled it in her arms like a child, heart pounding with maternal sympathy. That was the moment Zeus chose, because it was no ordinary swan. It was him, Zeus in disguise, yet again. He had taken the shape of something delicate, something unthreatening. He had weaponized innocence. What happened next depends on the storyteller. Some say he seduced her, others say he raped her, but no version ends with her having a choice. That night, Leda lay with her husband as well, and soon she laid not one, but 2 eggs. From them hatched 4 children. Castor and Pollux, Helen and Clytemnestra. 2 divine, 2 mortal. Twin boys, twin girls, twin destinies. Her children were beautiful, too powerful. Helen's face would spark the greatest war in myth. Clytemnestra would go on to murder her own husband. The sons would become warrior heroes, one destined to die, the other immortal. But none of them were ordinary. None of them were untouched by Zeus. Leda's story, like Europa's, is never told from her point of view. In paintings, she's often draped across a bed, swan curled over her, eyes closed as if asleep. But that's the lie of art. What's never shown is the fear, the shame, the confusion, the horror of being held by a god who pretends to be something soft. She remained a queen. She endured. But her daughters' legacies would be marked by blood, betrayal, and blame. Helen, seen as a temptress. Clytemnestra, as a killer. And Leda, just a footnote in their tragedies. No matter how high her crown sat, she would always be the woman the swan chose. The one who couldn't stop what came out of those eggs. And she too never got to choose her myth. Io was sacred. A priestess of Hera, devoted and chaste, set apart from ordinary women. She wasn't naive. She knew the risks of proximity to power, especially divine power. But that didn't matter. Zeus doesn't ask. He takes. One night, a thick mist fell upon the sanctuary, a cloud unnatural in its weight, its silence, and from it Zeus emerged. No disguise this time, just divine force cloaked in fog. He came to Io and violated her within the walls she thought were holy. When the fog lifted, she was no longer a girl of the temple. She was marked, and Hera, ever watchful, noticed. To hide the affair, Zeus did what no god should have the right to do. He transformed her into a cow, a beautiful heifer, pure white, with sorrowful eyes. And so, the girl who once prayed now mooed. The priestess became livestock, but Hera wanted vengeance. She accepted the gift of the cow and assigned Argus Panoptes to guard her, a giant with 100 unblinking eyes. Io could not speak, could not cry out, just wander, graze, and suffer under Argus's stare. Eventually, Zeus sent Hermes to slay Argus. That part, at least, is told with celebration in Olympus. But what's rarely mentioned is what came after. Hera sent a gadfly, a tiny stinging insect, to torment Io. It bit her endlessly, drove her across continents. She ran in agony from Greece to Egypt, through marsh and mountain and desert. Imagine it, a divine victim, stripped of language, swatting at pain, chased not just by a fly, but by the wrath of gods. No one could hear her. No one recognized her, and she could not speak her name. Eventually, Zeus restored her to human form. She bore a son, Epiphus, and became revered in Egypt. But that happy ending is the myth's polite curtain drop. What about everything she lost? Her voice, her station, her safety, her body, the sacred trust of the goddess she once served. Io's story is told as a wandering epic, how the Nile got its name, how Zeus saved his beloved. But underneath is a girl transformed into something she never was, punished for something she never asked for. And through it all, she never stopped running. Semele was no princess in distress. She was proud, clever, and beautiful, a Theban noblewoman who caught the eye of Zeus himself. But unlike so many others, Zeus didn't trick her, at least not at first. He courted her openly. Disguised as a mortal man, he whispered love into her ears. He brought her storms in a bottle, stars in his promises. And she believed him. They met in secret, the god and the mortal. And soon she was pregnant. Semele dared something most mortals never did. She wanted to see the truth. Not the mask, not the illusion, but Zeus in his full divine form. She wanted honesty. But the gods are cruel, and Hera crueler still. Hera, consumed by jealousy, disguised herself as an old crone and visited Semele. She planted a single poisonous seed. If he truly loves you, why won't he show you who he really is? It worked. Semele, now uncertain and aching for proof, asked Zeus to reveal himself in all his godhood. Zeus hesitated. He begged her to ask for anything else. But he had sworn an oath, the unbreakable promise of the river Styx. So he kept it. And when he unveiled his true form, lightning, fire, divine flame, Semele saw, and in the same breath she died. Her mortal body, fragile and unprotected, was incinerated in an instant, consumed not by betrayal, but by revelation. She had trusted him, loved him, and died for it. But the story doesn't end there. Inside her burned body, her child still lived. Zeus reached into the fire, rescued the fetus, and sewed it into his own thigh. Months later, from that impossible womb, Dionysus was born, god of wine, madness, ecstasy, and ritual. Semele became myth, then memory, then ash. Her name attached to a shrine, her son raised to Olympus. But her story, a caution, a quiet tragedy. What's told is that she was too bold, that mortals must never ask to see the truth. But what she really did was ask to be loved honestly, to be seen by the one who claimed to adore her. And for that, she was destroyed. Love, when tangled with power, burns. And Semele never had a chance to survive the fire. Callisto was wild, not untamed like a beast, but free like wind, one of Artemis's most loyal companions, a sworn virgin huntress who traded palace life for forest trails, arrows, and sisterhood. She didn't wear gowns or weave tapestries. She chased stags and howled at the moon. But even sacred oaths meant nothing to Zeus. He saw her in the woods, grimy, fierce, laughing, utterly alive, and decided he must have her. But how to approach a woman who served the goddess of chastity? He didn't come as himself. That would be too honest. Instead, he came in the most perverse disguise of all. He took the form of Artemis. Callisto saw her goddess step through the trees, trusted the familiar face. And when she reached out in reverence, it wasn't Artemis who touched her, it was Zeus. Some versions say she fought, some say she froze, but no version says she consented. Afterward, Callisto kept the secret. She buried the shame. Months passed, her belly swelled. Her sisters noticed first, then Artemis herself. And the judgment came swift and cruel. Artemis, cold as stone, expelled her, cast her out like a traitor, not a victim. Callisto was banished from the only life she had ever chosen, her oath shattered by a lie she couldn't explain. She gave birth alone to a son, Arcas. No husband, no support, only silence. And then, as if exile weren't enough, Hera added another punishment. She transformed Callisto into a bear, a mother, a woman, now a beast. Years later, her son, now grown, a hunter, stumbled upon the bear in the woods. He raised his spear. He did not know. How could he? And just as he would have struck, Zeus intervened. Not to apologize, not to make amends, but to avoid another tragedy. He hurled them both into the heavens, where Callisto became Ursa Major, the great bear, and her son, Ursa Minor. Some call it an honor, to live in the stars. But it wasn't mercy. It was avoidance. Callisto never regained her form. Her story was written in stars, but never heard in her voice. She was a follower of Artemis, a survivor of Zeus, a mother who nearly died by her son's hand. And all she ever wanted was to be left alone in the woods. Before Zeus ever laid eyes on Danae, her fate was already sealed by a prophecy. Her father, King Acrisius of Argos, was told that Danae's son would one day kill him. Terrified of his future, he did something monstrous in the name of prevention. He locked his own daughter in a bronze chamber. Underground, no windows, no escape, a tomb made for the living. She was young, royal, and utterly alone. The chamber was meant to keep men out, but it couldn't keep gods out. Zeus didn't appear as a bull or a swan this time. He came as a golden shower. Yes, ancient poets really called it that. A stream of liquid gold that slipped through the cracks in the ceiling and fell upon her skin. That's how she conceived Perseus. No warning, no voice, just divine invasion cloaked in beauty. When Acrisius discovered she had given birth, he didn't ask how. He didn't wonder what she had endured. He simply saw a threat. And so, Danae and her infant son were stuffed into a wooden chest and thrown into the sea. Imagine that. A mother clutching her baby, waves crashing over the lid, salt choking her breath, knowing that her own father had condemned them both to die. But fate wasn't finished with her. The chest didn't sink, it drifted. It landed on the island of Seriphos, where she was taken in by a fisherman, safe for a time. Until the island's king, Polydectes, decided he wanted her. She refused him, and so he plotted to get rid of Perseus, her son, her only defender. The king sent him on a suicide mission to slay Medusa. Danae, again, waited in uncertainty. Again, she was a pawn in a man's story. Yes, Perseus triumphed. Yes, he returned and saved her. But why is her resilience always treated as a footnote? Danae was caged, violated, exiled, threatened, and yet she endured. She raised a son while navigating the cruelties of prophecy, divine lust, and political danger. And somehow she survived it all. She is remembered as the mother of a hero, but she was a prisoner long before her son became legend. And no god ever came back to ask her how she felt about any of it. Alcmene was faithful. She had waited years for her husband, Amphitryon, to return from war, refusing all suitors, holding fast to duty and honour. When he finally came home, she welcomed him into her bed. Or so she thought. Because that night, the man who came through her door wasn't Amphitryon. It was Zeus, wearing his face, his voice, his scent. He stretched the night to 3 times its length and took what wasn't his. When the real Amphitryon returned the next day, Alcmene was confused, alarmed. She questioned him, realized what had happened. But it was too late. She was already pregnant. She gave birth to twins. One child, Iphicles, was her mortal husband's. The other, Heracles, belonged to Zeus. Hera, of course, noticed. And though Alcmene was the victim, Hera made her the target. She sent 2 serpents into the nursery to kill the infants. Iphicles screamed, but Heracles, just a baby, strangled the snakes with his bare hands. That was only the beginning. As Heracles grew, so did Hera's hatred. She drove him to madness, made him slaughter his own wife and children. And Alcmene, the mother who bore him, had to witness it all. Her son, the strongest man alive, was broken, cursed, tormented, because of a crime she never committed. Alcmene's life was consumed by divine fallout. She had no affair. She made no choice. Yet everyone around her suffered. Later myths try to smooth it over. They say she found peace, that her son was deified, honoured, that she lived out her days in safety. But even immortality feels hollow when it follows a life of manipulation, loss, and divine cruelty. No poet ever asked how it felt to be touched by a man wearing your husband's skin. No statue was carved of her grief. Alcmene is remembered as the mother of Heracles, a demigod hero. But she was also the woman who raised a child she didn't ask for, who bore the weight of a god's crime and the world's expectations, and still remained upright. She was never worshipped, never thanked, just left behind in the wreckage of Zeus's legacy. And in the shadows of every one of Heracles' labours stood the mother who suffered first. Antiope was a princess of Thebes, born into nobility, but doomed from the start. Zeus didn't come to her as light or storm or animal. He came as something filthier. He took the form of a satyr, half man, half beast. He attacked her in the wild, and the stories rarely pause to question whether she fought or cried. They simply move on. Pregnant, disgraced, and terrified, Antiope fled her home, not to chase love, not to fulfill destiny, just to survive. Her father, humiliated by what had happened, ordered her capture. Her uncle Lycus hunted her across the countryside like an animal. When they finally caught her, she was dragged back to Thebes and handed over to Dirce, Lycus's wife. And then the true torment began. Dirce didn't just punish Antiope. She humiliated her, enslaved her, bound her in chains. Day after day, year after year, Antiope was beaten, mocked, made to kneel. all while carrying the twin sons born from Zeus, Amphion and Zethus. But Zeus didn't intervene. He never does after the act is done. Instead, the twins were abandoned at birth, raised by shepherds in the wilderness. Antiope was left behind, alone, imprisoned and broken. Her sons grew into strong, intelligent men, unaware of who they truly were. When they finally learned of their mother's suffering, the rage came fast. Amphion and Zethus stormed Thebes, overthrew Lycus, and exacted brutal revenge. Dirce was tied to a bull and torn apart. It's told as justice, a blood-for-blood ending. But what about Antiope? She was free. But what does freedom mean after years of torture? After your body has been made a battleground for divine violence and human cruelty? No myth lingers on her healing. No bard sings of her recovery. Her story ends the moment her sons triumph, as if her value was only in birthing them, not surviving what came before. Antiope was chased, imprisoned, and hurt for choices she never made. She didn't ask to be loved by a god. She didn't ask to be hated by a queen. She just ran, through forests, through pain, through shame, and never stopped running until her son stopped it for her. And even then, no one asked her how far she'd come. Aegena's story begins like so many others, with desire from above and no warning. She was a nymph, daughter of the river god Asopus, born near the waters that should have protected her. But nothing ever protected a woman once Zeus noticed her. He abducted her. Some myths say he carried her off in the form of an eagle. Others say he simply snatched her from the riverbank and flew across the sky, taking her to a desolate island where no one could hear her scream. There, in isolation and silence, he had his way with her. The island became hers in name. Aegina. As if naming it after her made the assault noble. As if being claimed by Zeus gave her power. It didn't. It just made her a symbol of another place shaped by divine conquest. She gave birth to Aeacus, a future king. But Hera, ever watchful, discovered what had happened. And as always, she didn't punish Zeus. She punished the woman he used. This time, Hera's wrath wasn't directed at Aegena's body, but at the land itself. She unleashed a plague. People dropped in the streets. Fields turned barren. The entire island, now bearing Aegena's name, became a graveyard. And Aegina, surrounded by death, could only watch. She had no divine power to stop it, no magic to reverse it. Just a mother with a child, trapped on a cursed rock. Zeus, perhaps moved by her sorrow, or more likely wanting to salvage his legacy, transformed ants into people. Yes, ants. From the soil and dead trees, he fashioned the Myrmidons, a race of tireless warriors, and repopulated the island. But what about Aegina? She lived among these insect-born men, surrounded by reminders of the lives Hera destroyed. Her name carved into maps, her son honoured by heroes, but her trauma once again erased. She was reduced to geography, her pain written off as myth. People remember the Myrmidons for their loyalty and strength. They remember Aeacus as a wise king, but they forget the woman who never asked for any of it, who lost her home, her people, her safety, all because a god couldn't keep his hands to himself. Aegina didn't want an island. She just wanted to be left alone. Ilara's story is barely a whisper in the grand theatre of mythology. No wars, no stars, no temples, just silence and earth. She was a mortal princess, distant, dignified, and unnoticed, until Zeus found her. As usual, he desired her. As usual, Hera noticed. But this time, Zeus didn't seduce or disguise. He hid. He feared Hera's wrath so much that he buried Ilara deep beneath the earth. Literally. Not in metaphor, not in poetry. He placed her in a secret cavern beneath the ground so Hera wouldn't see what he was doing. There, in complete darkness, isolated from air and sky, Ilara carried his child. What must that have been like? No sun, no voice, no help. Just stone walls, and the slow, suffocating growth of something monstrous inside her. because the child she carried wasn't a delicate half-god. It was a giant, Tityos, so massive, so unnatural, that he grew and grew until he could no longer fit within her body. And then he tore his way out. That's how Ilara died. Not in glory, not in peace, not even in divine rage, but in labour, in agony, alone. Her womb became a tomb, and her body was destroyed by the very thing Zeus put inside her. The myths barely pause to mention her name. Tityos becomes the focus, a giant punished in the underworld for trying to violate another goddess. But Ilara, she doesn't get a constellation, she doesn't get a shrine, she gets a footnote. The irony is brutal. Zeus hid her underground to protect her, but that protection killed her, and he never came back to lift the stone. The ancient poets called her the Earth-Hidden One, as if that made her mysterious, mystical, part of some grand cosmic puzzle. But she wasn't a puzzle. She was a woman buried alive because a god wanted her and couldn't be bothered to defend her. And when she died, the earth swallowed her story with her. Ilara's name survives barely in old texts and dusty scrolls, but her voice, her fear, her death, those were never written down. Because in the end, even the earth couldn't hold the weight of a god's secret. Metis wasn't a mortal. She was a titaness, a goddess of wisdom, thought, and deep cunning. Unlike many of Zeus's lovers, she wasn't caught off guard in a meadow or a bedchamber. She was his equal, his advisor, his first wife. She didn't fall for his power. She guided it. She helped him win the Titanomachy, the war against the old gods. She was clever, careful, and essential. And when he wanted her, she became his partner. But power never tolerates competition for long. Metis became pregnant, and that's when the prophecy arrived. Your child will surpass you. A daughter first, then a son who will overthrow you. Zeus heard the words and, true to form, panicked. But he didn't rage or run. He played it calm. Then, one day, as Metis stood beside him, perhaps even comforting him, he tricked her into transforming into a small creature, a drop of water, a wisp of air, and he swallowed her. Just like that. His wife, his counsellor, the mother of his unborn child. Gone. But Metis didn't die. She remained alive inside him, thinking, watching, pregnant. She crafted armour for her unborn daughter in the depths of his body, and the hammering echoed in his skull. The pain grew unbearable. One day, unable to endure it, Zeus begged Hephaestus to split his head open with an axe, and from the wound sprang Athena, fully grown, armoured, brilliant, a goddess born not of pain, but through it, born from a womb made of fear. The world praised Zeus for birthing wisdom itself, for carrying the goddess of war and strategy in his mind. They called it a miracle. But no one asked where Metis went. She didn't emerge. She wasn't thanked. She was forgotten. The woman who helped shape the cosmos was erased by the very god she built up. Her daughter was honoured, revered, but she remained imprisoned forever in his gut, a ghost beneath Olympus. Metis represents the final cruelty. Even when a woman is divine, intelligent, powerful, even when she consents, creates, and contributes, she is still disposable. She was the mind behind the throne, and she was swallowed to protect it. Long before he could speak, before he could even cry, Oedipus was cursed. His life began with a whisper from the gods, spoken not in love, but in warning. The oracle of Delphi, with smoke in her lungs and madness in her eyes, told King Laius of Thebes a prophecy so unnatural, so vile, it struck terror straight through his bones. Your son will kill you, and marry your wife. Laius went pale. Jocasta, his queen, fell silent. Their unborn child was no longer a blessing. He was a threat, a walking omen. And when the baby was born, healthy and pink and blinking at the ceiling of the royal nursery, no one celebrated. Laius made a decision. He pierced the baby's ankles and tied them together with leather, crippling him, marking him, making it harder for the gods to guide him. Then he gave the infant to a servant and commanded him to leave the child to die in the wilderness. No name, no cradle, no goodbyes. But the servant, perhaps moved by pity or fear, couldn't go through with it. He handed the baby off to a shepherd from Corinth, a man who worked the hills, not the palace. That shepherd, in turn, brought the boy to the king and queen of Corinth, Polybus and Merope, who had no children of their own. They named him Oedipus, swollen foot, a name that would echo his twisted fate. They raised him as their own, never telling him he had been adopted. He grew up loved, respected, cherished, a prince with a future carved in gold. But deep beneath his skin, the prophecy stirred. A curse cannot be silenced by silence. Oedipus didn't know the truth of his birth, but the world did, the gods did. And they would not be ignored. His life would not be his own. Not for long. This was no fairy tale. There would be no escape from the words spoken in Delphi. Only the illusion of safety, until truth, like fate, found its way home. And so, the boy who should have died on a mountain was now sleeping beneath Corinthian silk, unaware that he had already taken his first step toward his father's grave and his mother's bed. Oedipus was raised in luxury, but luxury never silences doubt. He grew up in the palace of Corinth, surrounded by tutors, servants, and silk-draped corridors. King Polybus and Queen Merope treated him as their son, and Oedipus believed them, until someone laughed a little too loudly at a banquet. "You're not really their child," a drunk noble scoffed. It was just a careless insult. But it clung to Oedipus's mind like smoke to fabric. He asked Polybus. He asked Merope. They denied it, of course, swore he was theirs, hugged him a little too tightly, smiled a little too long. But the doubt didn't die, and so he went to Delphi, not for riches, not for glory, for the truth. The oracle didn't answer the question he asked. Instead, she gave him a prophecy of her own. "You will kill your father. You will marry your mother." Oedipus staggered from the temple in horror. Kill Polybus, marry Merope, the parents who raised him. Never. He wouldn't let it happen. He wouldn't go home. He would walk the earth instead. That was the first mistake. In trying to outrun the prophecy, he stepped straight into its path. He left Corinth, turning his back on the only family he'd ever known. He walked dusty roads, past shrines and crossroads, carrying nothing but fear in his chest and a vow on his lips. I will never fulfill that prophecy. But Oedipus, like so many before him, misunderstood the gods. They don't give you the future so you can change it. They give it to you because it cannot be changed. His ankles still bore the scars from the mountain. He had been marked by fate before he'd ever spoken his name. And now he was walking blind toward a father he didn't know, and a mother he'd never met. Every step forward was a step deeper into the trap. But he believed he was doing the right thing, that he was noble, that he could rewrite what the gods had written. Oedipus was not evil. He was a man desperate to be good, desperate enough to never look back, even as the prophecy circled him like a vulture in the sky. The road narrowed at a fork, dust curling in the heat, trees watching like silent judges. It was there that Oedipus met a stranger in a chariot. An older man, proud, flanked by servants. A lord, or a king. The road wasn't wide enough for two. A simple argument. Whose right of way? Whose authority? But the stranger sneered. One of his men struck Oedipus, and something inside the prince snapped. Not rage exactly, but something darker, something tangled with fear and fate. He fought back, hard, brutal. By the end, the man lay dead. The servants too, except one, who fled into the hills. Oedipus wiped the blood from his hands, breathless. He didn't know the man's name, didn't care, just another traveller, arrogant and cruel, removed from the road like an obstacle. He had no idea he'd just killed Laius, king of Thebes, his father, the very man who had ordered his death as a baby. The prophecy had begun to unfold, not with fanfare, not with some mystical sign, but in a roadside scuffle. A stranger made angry, a choice made in haste, a few inches of steel. The moment passed like any other. Oedipus kept walking. He never paused to wonder what he'd done. There was no grand realization, no thunder from the gods, just a prince with no name, a corpse with no legacy, and a prophecy slowly cracking open beneath their feet. This is how fate works. It doesn't shout. It whispers. The crossroad was no accident. In Greek stories, crossroads are sacred. They are where choices meet the divine. And Oedipus had made his choice. Violence instead of patience, pride instead of peace. But can we blame him? He didn't know. That's the tragedy. He thought he was avoiding the curse. Instead, he was fulfilling it with every step, every blow, every breath. The gods didn't force his hand. They simply built the road. And Oedipus, young, afraid, certain he was doing the right thing, walked it willingly. Behind him, the dust settled. The dead king's blood soaked into the soil. Ahead of him, a riddle waited. A city cried out for a saviour, and a throne stood empty, aching for a son to return home. At the gates of Thebes, death had made a nest. The city trembled beneath the shadow of the Sphinx, a creature with the body of a lion, the wings of an eagle, and the face of a woman. She was not merely a monster. She was a curse, sent by the gods, or perhaps by fate itself. She asked a single question of every man who dared approach the city. What walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs at noon, and 3 in the evening? No one had answered correctly. They had tried, of course. Warriors, scholars, princes, all failed, all died. The Sphinx devoured them on the spot, leaving their bones to bleach in the sun just outside Thebes. And the city, paralyzed by fear, waited. Their king had vanished. Their queen mourned. Their people starved. Then came Oedipus, dust-covered, road-weary, unaware that the blood of his own father still stained his sandals. He stood before the Sphinx and listened to her riddle. She stared into his soul, waiting to crush another life in her claws. But Oedipus didn't flinch. He didn't fight. He thought. He looked past the terror and saw the truth hiding inside the question. Man, he answered. In childhood he crawls on 4 legs. As an adult he walks on 2. In old age he leans on a cane, a 3rd leg. Silence. The Sphinx screamed, not in anger, but in defeat. She leapt from her perch and hurled herself into the rocks below. The curse was broken. Thebes was saved. The people poured from the gates, cheering, crowning Oedipus not just as a hero, but as their king. The throne, left vacant after Laius's mysterious death, now belonged to the stranger who answered death's riddle. As a reward, they offered him the queen, Jocasta. Beautiful, widowed, older, but still regal. She placed the crown on his head. She took his hand in hers. Neither of them knew. The prophecy, patient and silent, had just been fulfilled halfway. A murder and a marriage, both veiled in triumph. The city rejoiced. Oedipus smiled. Jocasta kissed her saviour. And above them, the gods said nothing. Because fate doesn't strike all at once. It unfolds, like a riddle answered too soon. Years passed. Oedipus ruled Thebes with a steady hand and a sincere heart. He was not a tyrant. He listened to his people. He protected them. He fathered children, 4 of them, with Queen Jocasta, never knowing she was the woman who had once nursed him as a baby. Together, they rebuilt the city. The past seemed forgotten, but fate doesn't forget. One morning, Thebes began to rot. A plague swept through the streets like a punishment. Crops withered. Livestock dropped dead. Women miscarried. The gods had turned their backs, and the people turned to their king. They cried out, "Oedipus, you who defeated the Sphinx, save us again." And he tried. He sent messengers to the oracle at Delphi to ask why the gods were punishing them. The answer returned like a blade. The land is polluted. The killer of King Laius lives unpunished in Thebes. Find him. Exile him. Only then will the curse be lifted. Oedipus stood before his people and made a vow. He swore to hunt down the murderer, to bring justice, to rid the city of its stain. He did not flinch. He did not suspect. He believed the killer was someone else, some stranger, hiding in plain sight. A traitor, a coward, someone else. Oedipus became obsessed. Every whisper became a clue. Every silence became suspicious. He interrogated witnesses, called upon prophets, ordered investigations, and with every step he moved closer to the truth. But the truth was patient. It watched as he tangled himself in his own certainty. He thought he was healing his people, that he was cleansing the land, that he was standing tall as a just king. But in trying to root out the infection, he was digging into his own soul. The gods did not scream. They didn't strike lightning. They simply waited for Oedipus to uncover what they already knew. He was both the disease and the doctor. The king he vowed to avenge was the father he had killed. The queen he kissed goodnight was the mother who had birthed him. But he didn't see it yet. Not then. Not as the city choked on ash and prayers while their king marched toward his own unravelling. When answers slip through mortal hands, kings turn to those who hear the gods. Oedipus summoned Tiresias, the blind prophet of Thebes, the man whose visions reached beyond time, whose blindness saw more than any set of eyes. If anyone could solve the mystery of Laius's murder, it was him. But Tiresias did not want to speak. He stood silent in the royal hall, lips pressed shut like a tombstone. The air trembled with tension. "Speak," Oedipus commanded. "For the sake of the city, tell me who killed Laius." Tiresias shifted, uncomfortable. "You don't want the truth." "I do. You can't bear it." That's when Oedipus made his second great mistake. He pushed too hard. He accused Tiresias of betrayal, of lies, of conspiracy. Perhaps the prophet himself had helped the killer escape. His anger burned so bright it blinded him more than any curse. So Tiresias finally spoke. "You are the killer you seek." The words landed like thunder. The court froze. Oedipus laughed, bitter, stunned. "Me? I didn't even know Laius. I was nowhere near Thebes when he died." But Tiresias didn't blink. "You were closer than you think. You are your father's killer, and your mother's husband." Silence. Jocasta paled. Oedipus roared in denial. He called the prophet mad, a fraud, a puppet of political enemies. But the seed had been planted, and seeds, even of prophecy, always grow. Tiresias left without another word. He didn't need to explain. His part in the story was done. He had struck the first crack in the wall of Oedipus's certainty. The king stood among nobles and whispers, swearing he was innocent, swearing he was loyal, swearing this was madness. But doubt, once born, doesn't die easily. And somewhere in the back of Oedipus's mind, the voice of the oracle stirred again. "You will kill your father. You will marry your mother." He had tried so hard to escape that future. Now, the past was clawing its way back through the walls. The plague still ravaged the streets. The gods still turned away. And the man who once solved riddles now found himself living inside one, piece by horrifying piece. Jocasta watched her husband unravel. At first, she dismissed the prophecy. With a gentle smile and careful hands, she tried to soothe Oedipus's growing fear. "Prophecies mean nothing," she told him. "We once received one too, long ago, that our son would kill his father. But we handled it." She looked away when she said that. Her voice caught just briefly. "We abandoned him, left him on a mountainside as a baby. That child is long dead." Oedipus went still. A child? left to die, ankles pierced. He felt something ancient stir in his bones, pain in his feet he'd long since learned to ignore. He asked questions, too many, pressed her for details. What mountain? What servant? When? Jocasta begged him to stop. "Why dig up the past?" she whispered. "You've saved Thebes. You are a good king, a good man. Let this rest." But Oedipus couldn't rest. The prophecy pressed against his ribs like a blade. Tiresias had planted doubt. Jocasta's story watered it. And now it bloomed into obsession. He sent for the old servant, the one who had taken the baby from the palace that day, the one who might still know the truth. Jocasta begged again. "Let the past lie. I love you. We have children. What does it matter who you were?" But for Oedipus, identity wasn't a comfort. It was a curse waiting to be understood. He believed that if he could uncover the truth, he could outmaneuver it, rewrite it, solve it, like he had the Sphinx's riddle. He didn't understand that this was no riddle with a clean answer. This was prophecy, and prophecy always demands a price. Jocasta saw where this was heading, her face once regal, now drawn with dread. She had lived with the edges of the truth for years, perhaps even guessed it, but she had chosen to bury it, chosen silence over collapse. Now Oedipus was pulling the bones from the ground. And for the first time, the queen who had welcomed him into her bed was looking at him like a stranger. "You are doomed," she whispered, tears spilling. "And if you go any further, so am I." But Oedipus couldn't stop, because once you start chasing truth in a Greek tragedy, you don't get to stop until it devours you. The old man stood before Oedipus trembling, not from age, but from memory. He had served King Laius long ago, had held the infant prince in his arms, had pierced the baby's feet himself, wincing as the soft flesh split, as the blood ran down the child's legs. He had tied the ankles, left the boy for dead on the slopes of Mount Cithaeron, but he hadn't killed him. Another shepherd had taken the baby. That shepherd, Oedipus now knew, had brought the child to Corinth, to King Polybus and Queen Merope. Oedipus felt the floor tilt beneath him. "Say it," he whispered. The old man wept. "That child was you." Every breath in the room stopped. Oedipus, king of Thebes, solver of riddles, beloved husband and father, was the child who was supposed to die. The boy who grew up far from Thebes, unaware of his bloodline, had walked back into it like a moth toward flame. He had killed Laius. At the crossroads, he had married Jocasta, his mother. He had fathered children, who were now both his sons and his brothers, his daughters and his sisters. The truth hit like thunder. He had spent his life running from the prophecy, shaping himself into the kind of man who could defeat fate with will and reason. And yet, every step had led him deeper into the exact future he feared. Oedipus did not scream. He did not deny. He simply stood there, silent, as if time had frozen around him. His whole identity, prince, outcast, saviour, king, crumbled in a single breath. He was the plague. The city had not been cursed by the gods. It had been cursed by him. Every prayer, every funeral, every sick child gasping for air was a consequence of one man's fate colliding with a city's need. He had vowed to find Laius's killer and exile him. Now the killer stood alone, and he knew what he had to do. But first, he had to face her. The woman who had kissed him, crowned him, bore his children. The woman who had once held him as a newborn. The mother he had made his queen. Jocasta didn't wait to hear the servant speak. She had seen it in Oedipus's face. She had seen it forming in his words, in the shape of his questions, in the unbearable precision of his doubt. The truth had crept through the palace like smoke. She had fought it for years, burying it beneath ceremony, motherhood, and silence. But now it stood naked before her. Oedipus was her son, her child, the infant she had surrendered to death out of fear. out of loyalty to a prophecy she had once believed too cruel to be real. And now that prophecy had not only come true, it had dressed itself in love, in wedding robes, in children with her eyes and his smile. She turned from him before the servant could speak. Her hands shook, her breath caught. The palace corridors twisted around her. She didn't scream, she ran, past the guards, past the servants who lowered their eyes, into the inner chambers where no one dared follow. And there, in the silence of their marriage bed, the bed that had held a mother and son wrapped in unknowing love, Jocasta took her own life. Some say she hanged herself. Some say she used the brooch from her gown, sharp and cold and final, but no one says she cried out. She left the world in silence, the way she had endured it. When Oedipus found her, he fell to his knees. He touched her face, her gown, the body that had once cradled his infant form, then welcomed him again as a man, and now, a third time, as the corpse of a woman who had loved too much and understood too late. He didn't speak. There was nothing to say. The gods had spoken years ago in Delphi. You will kill your father. You will marry your mother. And now, the prophecy lay fulfilled across every shattered piece of his life. The people outside still waited for justice. The city still burned with plague. But in that room there was only silence. The queen who couldn't live with the truth had chosen her exit, and the man who uncovered it was about to choose his punishment. There are some truths the eyes were never meant to see. Oedipus stood over Jocasta's body, his hands shaking. The room seemed smaller now, as if the walls themselves recoiled from what had happened. The silence was not empty. It was judgment. The gods had spoken through prophecy. He had walked every cursed word of it. But prophecy never tells you what to do afterward. He could have fled, could have thrown himself from the palace walls, could have begged the gods for mercy. Instead, he reached for Jocasta's brooch. The sharp pin glinted in the dim light. He held it for a moment, then, without hesitation, plunged it into his eyes. Once, twice, again, each stab a cry to the heavens, each puncture a scream without words. Blood poured down his face as light fled his world forever. Why blindness? Because the eyes had betrayed him, because they saw love where there was incest, justice where there was murder, salvation where there was ruin. The eyes had seen everything and understood nothing. So he destroyed them. The man who once solved riddles with clarity of mind and sharpness of vision would now wander in darkness, stripped of every illusion. He emerged from the palace, a horror to behold, his robes soaked in blood, his face scarred and dripping red tears, his hands outstretched like a beggar. The people gasped, covered their mouths, turned away, but he did not hide. "This is justice," he said. The man who had promised to exile Laius's killer now understood the cost. "I am that man," he told them. "Drive me out, cast me from the city, let Thebes breathe again." No one moved at first, not even Creon, Jocasta's brother, who now stood quietly at the palace steps. Oedipus, their saviour-turned-scourge, was no longer king, no longer family, just a man with a broken past and no future. He asked for exile. He begged for it. He pleaded not to see his children again, the children who were also his siblings. The gods were silent. But Thebes listened, and the king who once stood tall at the gates, who answered riddles, slew monsters and ruled with pride, now limped into darkness, not because he couldn't see, but because now, finally, he truly understood. Oedipus left Thebes not as a king, but as a shadow of one. Blind, barefoot, wrapped in rags, he wandered the earth with only a staff and his daughter Antigone to guide him. She was still a child, yet already burdened with the weight of her father's sins he never meant to commit. The world looked different now, not because he couldn't see it, but because he finally could. People whispered his name in fear. Some drove him away from their gates. Others offered pity, but never comfort. He was no longer the man who had saved Thebes. He was the man who brought the gods' rage upon it. But Oedipus never asked for sympathy. Only silence. Only distance. He passed through cities and forests, past shrines and graves, never resting long. In his blindness, he spoke more gently, thought more deeply. He had lived as a prince, a saviour, a king, a monster. Now, he lived as a question. Was he guilty? Was he cursed? Or was he simply human? The gods had said what would happen, but they never said how he should feel about it. They gave him a script, but not a conscience. Years passed. His beard grew long. His voice became gravel. Antigone stood taller, always at his side. She loved him not because he was innocent, but because he was hers. And finally, they arrived at Colonus, a grove sacred to the Furies near Athens. There, Oedipus stopped walking. He sat beneath the trees, breathed the sacred air, and whispered to the earth, "I am ready." Some say the gods forgave him. Others say the earth swallowed him whole. That thunder cracked, and he vanished between the roots, leaving no body behind. Just legend. He did not die as a king. He did not die as a monster. He died as a man who carried his own curse. A man who could not change the prophecy, but tried. A man who walked into darkness, and in doing so, found a kind of light. Oedipus's story isn't just a tragedy, it's a warning. That knowing the truth does not always bring peace. That fate once named cannot be outrun. And that sometimes the most heroic thing a man can do is face himself. Before Athena ever drew her first breath, she was already a danger to Olympus. Zeus sat upon his throne, storm-eyed and victorious, ruler of gods and men. He had overthrown Cronus, his own father, ending the age of the Titans. But deep in his bones, Zeus feared one truth: the throne he stole could be stolen from him. And then came the prophecy. It was not shouted by oracles or carved in lightning. It was whispered in dread by Gaia, mother of the earth, and Uranus, father of the sky. If you lie with Metis, the child she bears will overthrow you. Zeus froze. Metis wasn't just any goddess. She was wisdom incarnate, clever, sharp, cunning beyond measure. She had helped him in his rise to power. She was not a victim. She was a partner. And now she carried his child. The first child, they said, would be a daughter, wise and strong. But the second would be a son, and that son would be greater than Zeus, stronger, smarter, fated to topple the sky. Zeus had felt the sting of prophecy before. He knew what it meant to be the overthrower, and he knew what happened to those who waited too long. He couldn't kill Metis. That would defy divine law. So instead, he swallowed her. Yes, Zeus opened his mouth and devoured the goddess whole, swallowed her mind, her magic, her unborn child, just like his father Cronus had once swallowed him. But Zeus didn't digest her. Metis didn't vanish. She lived inside him, thinking, whispering, creating. The wisdom he consumed didn't dissolve. It waited. And so, Zeus walked Olympus with calm eyes and a storm beneath his skin. He thought he had ended the prophecy, controlled fate, outwitted destiny. But gods should know better. Inside the god of thunder, a goddess was growing, not in darkness, but in brilliance, not in fear, but in armor. She would not be born in blood. She would be born in defiance. Athena, the daughter of wisdom and power, was coming, and even Zeus, king of the sky, would not be able to contain her for long. Zeus believed he had ended the threat. He walked the halls of Olympus as if the prophecy had died with the swallowing of Metis. Thunder cracked at his will. The other gods bowed low. No one questioned the king who had consumed his own fear. But fear doesn't digest. Inside Zeus, Metis lived, not as a ghost or regret, but as thought still forming. She spoke to him in dreams, murmurs in his chest, ideas he couldn't explain, strategies that arrived unbidden. Her mind became his, but not entirely. And inside that divine mind, something extraordinary was happening. A child was growing, not in a womb, but in a skull. This child wasn't weak. She didn't kick softly or squirm. She forged armour in the folds of her father's brain, forged a spear from thought, a helmet from resolve. As she grew, the sound of hammering echoed inside Zeus's head. Day and night the pounding worsened. He couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. His headaches grew unbearable, like storms crashing behind his eyes. He pressed his palms to his temples and roared across Olympus. No god dared approach, but pain has a way of humbling even kings. Finally, Zeus called for help. Hephaestus came, the divine blacksmith, strong and quiet, born of flame and forge. He stood before the king of the gods and asked no questions. Zeus knelt, clutching his head, trembling with agony. "Strike," he ordered. Hephaestus lifted his axe. One clean blow to the centre of Zeus's skull, and the heavens held their breath. The crack echoed across the world, and from the split in Zeus's head, wrapped in light and war song, stepped a goddess. Fully grown, clad in golden armour, shield in one hand, spear in the other, eyes like polished steel, gleaming with intelligence. Athena. She did not cry. She did not stumble. She stood tall. The goddess of wisdom had not been born in softness or secrecy. She had emerged in force, forged in thought, and delivered through agony. And for the first time, Olympus saw something even Zeus could not control. Not fire, not storm, but reason. And she had arrived, not as his downfall, but as his daughter. When Athena stepped from Zeus's skull, the heavens did not tremble. They paused. Olympus, a realm of drama and fury, of vanity and storms, fell silent. The gods, who had seen monsters born from chaos, lovers from foam, and vengeance from blood, had never witnessed anything like this. She was born, not of the body, but of the mind. Not from womb or sea or bone, but from thought itself. She stood tall in shining armour, golden, flawless, divine. Her shield gleamed like morning sun on polished bronze. Her eyes didn't flicker like flame. They watched, measured, weighed. She was not war's fire. She was war's discipline, and she said nothing. She didn't need to. The gods murmured. Aphrodite blinked, Hera frowned, Ares scoffed. But none dared question her place. She had not claimed Olympus by force, like Zeus. She had not tricked her way in, like Hermes. She had been born into it like an answer. Zeus, nursing the wound in his head, looked at his daughter and did not fear her. He should have. Not because she would betray him, but because she would surpass him in ways that mattered more. He ruled with lightning. She would rule with clarity. He broke what he couldn't bend. She bent without breaking. That day, Olympus gained more than a new goddess. It gained a conscience. Athena was named the goddess of wisdom, yes, but more than that, she was strategy. She was not just clever. She was tactical. She didn't act from rage or passion. She planned. She prepared. She paused. And that made her dangerous. To some, she was a marvel, sharp as a blade, calm as the sea before battle. To others, a threat wrapped in beauty. Even Ares, the god of raw war, eyed her with distrust. He fought with fury. She fought to win. The other gods celebrated, of course. They cheered, offered gifts, feigned joy. But deep beneath their toasts, Olympus shifted. Because now there was someone on the mountain who didn't shout, who didn't seduce, manipulate, or destroy, she thought. And when Athena thinks, the world changes, not with thunder, but with strategy. Zeus had many children, but none like Athena. He fathered gods of wine and war, of music and mischief, each with their gifts, each with their flaws. But Athena, she was his alone, born from his mind, not his desire, forged in pain, not passion, and that made her different. She wasn't ruled by impulse. She didn't beg for favour or fear punishment. She didn't tremble before his temper or flatter his ego. She challenged him, not openly, not foolishly, but in the quiet way that cuts deeper. She questioned. She advised. And sometimes she disagreed. Most of Zeus's children mirrored him, flames that fed his storm. But Athena was something else entirely. She was reflection, restraint, the side of power that asks, not can I, but should I? And that made Zeus uneasy. He adored her, yes, favoured her above most. He gave her honours, the Aegis shield, a place at his right hand, even the power to wield his thunderbolt in his absence. But even in that trust, there was fear. Not of rebellion, Athena never sought to dethrone him, but of irrelevance. She didn't need to rage to make an impact. She didn't need drama. When disputes rose on Olympus, Athena rarely shouted. She watched, waited, then spoke, and silence followed. Her voice carried weight because it carried thought. She began to guide the gods, even when Zeus didn't ask for her counsel. When war brewed between mortals, she wasn't just present, she was planning. She turned battles with whispers, not screams. It was then Zeus realized the truth. He hadn't swallowed the threat. He had raised it. The prophecy had said a child of Metis would overthrow him. But Athena didn't need a throne to change Olympus. She didn't want power in the way the others did. She simply was power. Subtle, measured, and precise. And that frightened Zeus more than any uprising. Because while he ruled the sky, she began to rule the mind. Not through force, but through influence. And in Olympus, influence is everything. Athena chose solitude, not because she feared love, but because she didn't need it. Unlike Aphrodite, who stirred desire in gods and mortals alike, Athena kept herself untouched. She had no lovers, no consorts, no entanglements. Her power came not from seduction or motherhood, but from something rarer, independence. She was a virgin goddess by choice, and in Olympus that was a statement. It meant she owed no one her body. No god could claim her. No mortal could tame her. She was not defined by her relationships, only by her purpose, and that purpose was protection. Athena was war, yes, but not the kind that left cities burning for the joy of it. That was Ares, her half-brother. He relished blood. She calculated victory. Where Ares charged in blind rage, Athena planned the ambush. Where he screamed and bled, she waited in silence, then struck where it mattered most. The Greeks would worship her not just as a goddess of wisdom, but as their guardian, a protector of cities, a builder of walls, a defender of law. Her armour wasn't for glory, it was for duty. She walked the battlefield like a surgeon walks an operating room, calm, exact, efficient. She never wasted energy. She never raised her spear without a reason. Mortals feared her, but they also prayed to her. Because if you were righteous, if your cause was just, if your city stood for order, Athena would fight for you. And unlike other gods, she didn't demand temples soaked in sacrifice. She asked for cleverness, courage, a plan. In myth, she remained untempted by vanity. When a sculptor dared to carve her form too beautifully, she destroyed his work, not out of rage, but to remind the world, I am not here to be admired. I am here to act. Even the gods tread lightly around her, not because she was cruel, but because she was certain. She did not scream to be heard. She spoke with truth, and truth shook the heavens. A goddess of the mind, a warrior of restraint, a protector who never had to prove her power, because everyone could feel it. Athena, the virgin warrior, stood alone on Olympus, not because no one wanted her, but because she belonged only to herself. Not all gods are loved equally, and not all cities are built on war. When the people of a fledgling city in Greece prepared to name their divine patron, 2 gods stepped forward to claim it. Poseidon, lord of the sea, rose first, trident in hand, eyes flashing like the deep. He struck the ground, and from the cracked earth surged a saltwater spring. Powerful, impressive, a gift of the sea. Then came Athena. No drama, no storm. She knelt and touched the soil. From her palm grew an olive tree, its branches strong, its fruit full, its roots deep, a symbol of peace, of wisdom, of endurance. The gods watched in silence. Poseidon's gift was a display of power. Athena's was a promise of life, and the people chose her. They named their city Athens, not after the sea, but after the goddess of wisdom. They did not want a ruler of tides and tempests. They wanted a guide, a protector, a mind to shape their laws, not just shield their walls. Athena became the soul of the city. She didn't just watch over its battles, she guided its culture, its schools, its debates, its architecture. She was present in their every choice. And in return, they honoured her not with bloodshed, but with brilliance. The Parthenon rose in her name, a temple of marble and symmetry, built with such grace that even the gods admired it. Inside stood her statue, not soft or smiling, but poised and ready, spear in hand, shield at her side, wisdom behind her eyes. She wasn't their queen, she was their example. The Athenians didn't worship her for her wrath. They worshipped her for her restraint. They saw in her the kind of power that listens before it strikes, the kind that defends, but never dominates, the kind that builds, teaches, and lasts. And so, while many gods ruled from above, Athena walked among minds. She became the heartbeat of a civilization that would outlive empires, a city born not from conquest, but from a tree. A goddess chosen not for fear, but for hope. And that choice would echo through history. Because Athena didn't just win a city, she inspired one. In the quiet town of Lydia lived a girl whose hands danced with thread. Her name was Arachne. She wasn't noble. She wasn't divine. She was a mortal girl with a loom and a gift so breathtaking it drew whispers from far and wide. Her tapestries shimmered with colour, with life. Gods and mortals alike stood still before her work, and that eventually became the problem. Pride crept in, quiet, tempting, as it always does. Arachne began to say it aloud. My work is better than Athena's. Some warned her, others begged her to stop. But Arachne smiled and kept weaving. Up on Olympus, Athena heard. The words stung, not because they questioned her power, but because they insulted her purpose. Athena wasn't just the goddess of wisdom and war. She was the goddess of crafts, of skill, of the silent art that shapes civilizations. And Arachne, this girl with no temple or title, dared to call herself her equal. So Athena came down. She disguised herself as an old woman and warned Arachne directly. Humble yourself. Give thanks. Say that your gift was from the gods. But Arachne didn't bow. She met the goddess's eyes and said, If she thinks she's better, let her prove it. Athena dropped her disguise and accepted the challenge. 2 looms, 2 hands, 1 contest. They wove side by side, the air thick with silence. Athena's tapestry showed the glory of Olympus, Zeus ruling, Poseidon roaring, herself standing proud in victory, each thread perfect, each image divine. Arachne's showed the truth. Zeus deceiving women, Apollo chasing nymphs, the gods cruel, jealous, petty. And it was flawless, not a single error. Even Athena, in her divine heart, knew the girl had woven perfection, but truth can wound deeper than insult. Athena didn't scream. She didn't smite. She touched Arachne gently and turned her into a spider, not out of wrath, but out of mercy. A creature that would weave forever. No pride, no applause, just silk and silence and the memory of what had been. And so the first spider spun her web under moonlight, and the goddess of wisdom turned away, not with hatred, but with respect and sorrow. because she had not crushed a rival, she had honoured a mirror. Athena never wore her armour for decoration. Every piece had a story. Every symbol had teeth. But none more so than her shield, the Aegis. A shield so fearsome, so divine, it didn't just protect, it terrified. Etched upon its centre was a face twisted in rage and agony. The head of a creature once feared by all, Medusa. But how did a Gorgon's face come to rest in the hands of a goddess? Long before it became a weapon, it was a tragedy. Medusa had once been beautiful, a mortal priestess in Athena's temple, with hair like woven night and a face that turned heads. But beauty is dangerous in the world of gods. And Poseidon, lord of the sea, took her by force, in Athena's temple. It was a violation of sanctuary, a desecration. And Athena, furious, not at Poseidon but at the shame left behind, transformed Medusa. She turned her into a Gorgon, hair into serpents, eyes into weapons, a face that turned all who looked upon it into stone. And then, years later, a hero came. Perseus, young and brash, was sent to slay Medusa, but he could not do it alone. Athena gave him her shield, polished to a mirror's shine, so he would not have to look at Medusa directly. She guided his strike, watched as the blade severed the head, and when it was done, she took the Gorgon's face for herself. Why? Was it revenge? Was it cruelty? Or was it something else? She placed Medusa's severed head upon her shield, not as a trophy, but as a warning, a symbol of terror, yes, but also of pain, of consequence, of what happens when violence walks unchecked, even in sacred places. The Aegis became more than protection. It was the reminder that wisdom is not always soft, that justice sometimes wears a monstrous face, that even gods carry guilt they do not speak of. When Athena raised her shield in battle, her enemies saw not just a goddess, but the haunting face of rage turned inward, of sorrow twisted into strength, and they ran, not from Athena, but from what she had chosen to carry, because even wisdom has ghosts, and she wore hers in plain sight. Athena was a goddess of strategy, justice, and restraint, but even she could not stop fate. In the city of Troy, war smouldered like kindling before the spark. The gods had taken sides, tempers flared, and soon the greatest war of the ancient world consumed east and west alike. Athena stood with the Greeks, not because she loved bloodshed, but because of a single broken oath. Paris of Troy had judged Aphrodite more beautiful than her. Still, even in war, Athena sought to guide rather than destroy. And in that chaos, there was one mortal she favoured above all others, Achilles. He was unmatched on the battlefield, quick-footed, fire-forged, a storm in human form. But Athena didn't love him for his fury. She admired his mind. Beneath the rage, there was reason. A warrior who could think. She whispered strategy into his ear, held his shield when he faltered, even restrained his hand when wrath nearly overtook him. In every clash, her influence sharpened his instinct. But Athena knew what Achilles did not. He was doomed. He had been offered a choice: live a long life in obscurity, or a short one remembered forever. He chose the latter. Glory in exchange for peace. Memory in exchange for time. And Athena could not change that. She stood by as the war dragged on, each day bloodier than the last. She watched as Patroclus, Achilles' closest companion, wore his armour and fell beneath Trojan spears. She felt the scream Achilles let loose when he learned of his death. The kind of scream that tears not just the air, but the soul. Achilles returned to battle like a man already dead. Athena did not try to stop him. She armed him, strengthened him, then let him go. He would kill Hector, yes. He would burn brighter than any hero before him. But soon, he too would fall, struck down not by brute force, but by fate's cold hands. And Athena, goddess of wisdom, of war, of reason, could only watch. She had guided him, protected him, even loved him in her own divine way. But she could not save him, because not even gods can undo the choices mortals make, especially the ones that bring them glory and ruin. While other gods demanded worship, Athena offered humanity something else: tools. She didn't give fire, that was Prometheus, but she gave knowledge of how to shape it, how to use it, how to turn chaos into civilization. She wasn't a goddess of the hunt or the harvest. She was the goddess of craft, of invention, of hands that build, minds that design, and eyes that see possibilities in stone, cloth, and wood. She taught mortals to tame horses, not just to ride them, but to yoke them, to guide them, to turn wild power into ploughed fields and pulled wagons. She showed women how to weave, not just for beauty, but for survival. Warmth, shelter, pattern, art. She gave them the olive tree, a gift more profound than gold or silver. It bore fruit to eat, oil to cook and anoint, wood to carve and burn. A tree that asked for patience and returned it 100-fold. While other gods gave weapons, Athena gave instruction. Where Ares screamed into war, she built city walls, designed battlements, taught generals how to think before striking. She didn't end conflict, no god could, but she taught mortals to wage it intelligently, with purpose. To the Greeks, she was more than divine. She was practical, a goddess who didn't float above their lives, but walked among their choices, whispered into the ears of blacksmiths, guided the hands of architects, shaped not just their faith, but their future. She inspired the first philosophies, the first blueprints, the first laws, justice with a spine, wisdom with a sword, and unlike gods who gave gifts in anger or lust or pity, Athena gave hers in love, not the warm, sentimental kind, but love rooted in belief, in potential. She believed mortals could be more than animals, that they could build something lasting, something just, something wise. Her temples didn't ask for blood, they asked for thought. Athena's gifts weren't miracles dropped from the sky, they were seeds. And in time, those seeds would become cities, poems, laws, and stories, including this one. Because even now, when we choose reason over rage, discipline over chaos, thought over impulse, we are still living in the world Athena imagined and gave to us. Time wears down even the greatest of gods. Olympus, once the center of the world, faded. Temples crumbled, statues weathered in the wind, new empires rose, new names were spoken in prayer, and yet Athena remained, not in marble, not in myth, in mind. While other gods became legends of passion, thunder, or jealousy, Athena became something else, an ideal, a symbol not of what we are, but of what we strive to be. Justice without cruelty, power without corruption, intelligence without arrogance. She never ruled mortals by fear. She guided them through reason, and when the gods themselves fell silent, her voice, quiet, measured, unwavering, echoed in every courtroom, every school, every city built on thought instead of violence. Athena's strength was never in brute force. It was in legacy. She lived on in philosophies, not battles, in questions, not orders, in books, not swords. The owl, once her companion, became a symbol of clarity and vision. Her olive tree stood not just in Athens, but in every civilization that valued law and thought, and her spirit whispered through the pens of Plato, the blueprints of Da Vinci, the quiet rebellion of every girl who dared to speak her mind in a world that told her not to. Because Athena was never just for the battlefield, she was for the builder, the thinker, the one who holds the line when everyone else reaches for a blade. In every era her image returned, reborn not as a goddess, but as an idea. A woman in armor, head high, eyes sharp, refusing to be silenced. And each time she was different, and each time she was the same. Even now, She waits in every mind that asks, is there a better way? Not louder, not faster, wiser. The myths may fade, the temples may fall, but wisdom, that survives. And if you listen closely, when the world rages, when reason feels like a dying ember, you may hear her voice again, not shouting, not weeping, just thinking. Athena was not born to rule Olympus. She was born to outlast it. Before the golden god of music or the silver-eyed huntress ever took a breath, their mother was hunted. Leto was no queen of Olympus. She was a titaness, gentle, wise, and quiet. But she caught the eye of Zeus. And when she became pregnant with his twins, the sky held its breath. 2 divine children, not yet born, already stirred the world. Hera, Zeus's wife, saw red. Not just because of the betrayal, Zeus's infidelity was as constant as thunder, but because this time the children were powerful, destined. 1 boy, 1 girl, Apollo and Artemis. So Hera did what only a goddess could do. She cursed the earth itself. No land beneath the sun would offer Leto sanctuary. No city would take her in. No nation, no island, no resting place. Wherever she went, the ground turned hard. The wind spat dust. Doors slammed shut. Even the animals turned away. Leto wandered, barefoot and swollen with life, through mountains and deserts, through whispers and fear. Every breath was tight. Every step, agony. Her body ached with 2 gods growing inside her, and yet she could find no place to rest. And behind her, something moved. A shadow. A hiss. Python, the monstrous serpent, born of Gaia herself, a guardian of the old oracles, a creature so vast that it draped across mountains like a living rope, sent, some say, by Hera, others say by fate. Whatever the truth, it hunted her. It slithered behind her across rivers and ridges, its tongue flickering, its eyes always watching. Not to kill her, not yet, but to make her suffer, to make her run. The earth rejected her. The gods stayed silent, and still Leto kept walking. She held her belly, whispering to the children within, promising them life, promising they would rise, no matter how the world tried to crush them. She was not a warrior. She carried no weapon, but she carried gods. And in her silence, there was defiance. The twins were coming, light and shadow, sun and moon, and even the cursed soil would tremble the moment they opened their eyes. Leto was at the edge of collapse. She had wandered the known world, her feet blistered, her breath shallow. No land would hold her. No temple would take her in. Not even the animals laid in her path would stay. They scattered, warned off by Hera's curse. But then came a whisper of a place, a drifting island, rootless, floating. Delos, a barren rock, forgotten by most gods, tossed in the Aegean Sea like a stone skipped by the Titans. It had no wealth, no army, no shrine. It was too small to matter. And that made it perfect. Because Delos was not fixed to the earth. It wasn't bound by the curse. Leto arrived under a pale sky, her knees buckling. She collapsed on its stony surface and clutched her belly. The pain of labour was near. The twins stirred, impatient, divine. Delos trembled, not in fear, but in choice. The island, so often overlooked, so often adrift, made a decision that would echo for eternity. It anchored itself. The roots of Delos pierced the seabed. It locked into place, became land, became home, just long enough. And that was rebellion. A quiet, impossible defiance against Hera herself. The island gave Leto its only olive tree for shade. Its cliffs shielded her from the serpent Python, who circled but could not reach. And there, alone except for a few nymphs and the wind, she gave birth. First came Artemis, the huntress, the silver maiden, emerging in silence, calm and wise, even as a newborn. She didn't cry. She watched. And then, after 9 more days of pain, Leto gave birth again. to Apollo, radiant as sunrise, glowing with golden light. His cry echoed like music across the waves. The twins were born, and the curse had been broken. Delos was no longer just a drifting rock. It was now sacred ground, the birthplace of gods. And though it had nothing to offer, not temples, not power, not gold, it gave the one thing no other place dared: sanctuary. And in doing so, Delos became immortal. Because sometimes greatness begins not with strength, but with compassion, and a choice to shelter those the world has cast aside. They were born together, but they were not the same. Artemis arrived first, quiet as a shadow beneath leaves, her eyes wide, calm, ancient. Though a newborn, she carried herself like a goddess who had seen the world already and found it wanting. She was the moon before it learned to shine, and when her brother struggled to enter the world, she waited, watched her mother cry out in pain. 9 days passed, and then, with a wail that split the horizon, Apollo was born, his skin gold-tinged, his hair radiant, his eyes fierce. Where Artemis had whispered into the world, Apollo sang his way in. His very breath hummed like strings plucked by the fates themselves. The gods watched from afar. They had not dared intervene during Hera's curse. But now, as they saw the newborn twins on Delos' rocky shore, they felt something shift. These were not ordinary gods. They were prophecy wrapped in swaddling cloth. Even as infants, the twins showed their nature. Apollo's first laugh sent birds into flight. Light bent toward him. Flowers opened in his direction. Artemis reached for the shadows, her fingers tracing the curve of a bow only she could see. The moon itself, distant and cold, seemed to tilt in curiosity. Together, they were balance, sun and moon, clarity and quiet, rage and grace. Leto held them, weak from her long suffering, but victorious. Her pain had been her offering, and the gods she bore were her answer. Apollo grew fast, his limbs strong, his voice sure. Artemis beside him grew in silence, watching, always watching. But they both knew something waited, something still hunted. Python, the ancient serpent, still slithered through forests and caves, sensing the gods who had escaped him. And Apollo, though barely grown, already felt the pull of destiny. The fire in his chest wasn't just light, it was vengeance. For his mother. For every mile she had walked in agony. He was not born to run. He was born to face what others feared. And Artemis, she would walk at his side. The hunt had not begun, but the twins were ready. Because sometimes power is not in being born first. It's in choosing who you protect. Far from Delos, nestled between cliffs and whispering laurel trees, sat the ancient sanctuary of Delphi. Even before Apollo's birth, Delphi had been sacred, a place where the earth murmured secrets, and mortals came crawling for glimpses of fate. But its wisdom didn't come freely. It was guarded. By Python. Born of Gaia herself, Python was no ordinary beast, not a mindless serpent. He was primordial, a hulking creature of scale and shadow, older than Olympus, older than prophecy itself. He coiled around the slopes of Mount Parnassus, eyes burning like coals, fangs dripping venom strong enough to rot mountains. He didn't speak, but his presence silenced all. Even the gods tread carefully near Delphi, for Python did not answer to them. He served the deep earth, and beneath his heavy coils, the oracle of Gaia whispered only to those he allowed near. But Python had grown restless. He had failed to stop Leto, had watched her escape with her divine children. Now, word reached him that the boy, the glowing son of Zeus, was rising, and Python knew. This was no longer about revenge. It was about survival. For centuries he had ruled Delphi. Mortals feared him, spirits obeyed him. But the world was changing. The old gods were fading. And the boy god Apollo? He was not coming to worship. He was coming to claim. Back on Delos, Apollo heard the stories. The priests spoke in awe, the nymphs in fear. But Apollo didn't tremble. He listened. He learned. Python was a guardian, a tyrant dressed in the skin of tradition. And Apollo, still young, but no longer a child, felt it in his bones. Delphi was meant for him, not just because he was powerful, but because he would bring clarity where Python had brought fear. The oracle would be freed. The serpent would fall. But this wouldn't be a battle of equals. It would be the first time a new god challenged an ancient force face to face. And in that clash, the world would feel the turning of an age. The sun was rising, and it would shine on blood. Apollo was still young, but the fire in him burned ancient. He stood beneath the olive trees of Delos, staring toward the horizon, not with childish wonder, but with the eyes of a god preparing for war. His golden hair caught the wind. His fingers twitched, not in fear, but in focus. He would not wait for Python to strike again. He would go to Delphi, but not with thunder, not with armies, with a bow. The gift came not from Zeus, nor forged in Olympus's fires. It came from Hephaestus, the smith god who saw potential where others saw youth. He crafted it of polished gold and silver, inlaid with truth, a weapon not of chaos, but of precision. Apollo accepted it in silence. His hand curved around the grip like it had always been his, and when he drew the string, the air itself tightened. He practiced in the groves, far from Delos's eyes, not to impress, but to prepare. Each shot was a vow, each arrow a question to the universe. Are you watching? Artemis watched, always. She too carried a bow now, slender, silver, moonlit. She didn't speak much, but when she did, it was sharp. You only get one chance, she told him, not unkindly. Python isn't a beast. He's memory. He's fear. Apollo nodded. Then I'll be precision. He wasn't chasing glory. He wasn't driven by pride. He was thinking of his mother, of the serpent that had hunted her, of the years Python had darkened the oracle's mouth. He did not want to kill a creature. He wanted to cleanse the place it poisoned. He was a god of light, and light reveals. The moment arrived. The sun crested the sea in a halo of fire. Apollo stood at the shore, bow in hand, quiver across his back. Not armoured, not crowned, just steady. Delos held its breath. Artemis reached out once, brushing his shoulder, not to stop him, but to let him know she would remain. He set out alone, to Delphi, to the mountain, to the coils of fate wrapped in shadow and venom. And though he walked as one, he carried the wrath of a sun, the promise of a god, and the silence of a hunter. The bow would sing soon, and the world would change its tune. Apollo arrived at Delphi not as a guest, but as a reckoning. The cliffs rose high above him, scorched by sun and scarred by time. Laurel trees whispered warnings, the wind trembled, and in the distance, coiled around the sacred stones, Python waited. The serpent knew he was coming. He felt it in the shift of the earth, in the nervous rustle of birds, in the way the light no longer avoided the caves but crept inward. This was no mortal child. This was the beginning of the end. Apollo didn't charge. He walked. His bow gleamed in the morning light. Each footstep echoed, not just in the stone, but in history. Python uncoiled slowly, deliberately, the size of 10 chariots, muscles rippling beneath scales dark as storm clouds. His eyes burned not with rage, but with warning. "I am older than your name," Python hissed. "I have coiled around this earth since it breathed." Apollo raised the bow. "I'm not here for your age," he said, calm and unshaken. "I'm here for your shadow." The first arrow loosed was light itself. It struck Python's flank with a flash, burning through scale and hide. The serpent screamed, a sound that shook valleys and startled clouds. But Python was not so easily undone. He struck back, snapping trees, shattering boulders, venom hissing through the air. The ground quaked beneath his fury, But Apollo was faster. He moved like sunrise, sharp, silent, inevitable. Arrow after arrow flew. Each one sang, each one landed. But it wasn't just force. It was precision. Apollo didn't aim for the heart. He aimed for the corruption, the rot in the roots of Delphi, the fear Python had woven into the stones. Python lunged, fangs bared wide, but Apollo leapt, spun, and loosed a final arrow through the serpent's open mouth. Silence. Then the mountain exhaled. Python collapsed, coils folding in upon themselves, his shadow peeling back from the land like night before dawn. And with that, Delphi was free. The oracle stirred. The wind lightened. The laurel trees lifted their leaves to the sun. Apollo lowered his bow, not in triumph, but in understanding. He hadn't just killed a monster. He had cleared the path for truth to speak again. And the world would never forget his name. Delphi was quiet after the serpent fell. The cave still echoed with Python's last breath. The rocks, once slick with venom, now shimmered with dew. The very earth beneath the temple stones felt lighter, as if some ancient weight had finally lifted. But the most profound change wasn't in the silence. It was in the voice that followed. Deep within the sacred chamber, where shadows had long ruled, the oracle stirred. Not the old voice of Gaia, not the cryptic whispers twisted by fear, but something new, clearer, warmer, a thread of fire wrapped in thought. Apollo had claimed Delphi, but he didn't seize it with chains or walls. He didn't sit on a throne or demand worship. Instead, he offered the world a gift, a place where truth could speak, through his oracle, the Pythia. A mortal woman chosen not for beauty or lineage, but for spirit. She would sit at the temple's centre, inhale the vapours from deep within the earth, and speak what the god saw. Visions not of terror, but of clarity. Answers, yes, but never without mystery. Because truth is never given. It's earned. Word spread quickly. Kings travelled for weeks to kneel before her. Warriors came to ask if their battles would end in glory or doom. Farmers came to ask when to sow. Philosophers came to ask if the gods truly listened. And above them all, Apollo stood, not visibly, but present. His music hummed through the laurel leaves. His warmth lingered in the stone. And in the Pythia's eyes, there was always a flicker of sunlight not born from this world. The oracle of Delphi became the beating heart of Greece, not because it gave power, but because it demanded thought. Apollo had slain the monster, yes, but his greater gift was this. He had replaced fear with reflection, and in doing so, he rewrote what it meant to be a god, not just to punish, but to illuminate, because light, once unleashed, never hides again. And Delphi, bathed in that light, would never belong to shadows. While Apollo stood bathed in triumph, Artemis remained in the silence of the woods. She had not followed him to Delphi. She had not loosed arrows at Python. That battle was his destiny, his reckoning, and she honoured it by staying where she was strongest, in the wild. But she felt it. The moment the final arrow struck, the moment the oracle opened its eyes, the moment the serpent's shadow shriveled beneath her brother's light. She stood barefoot on a cliffside as dawn broke, watching not just the sun rise, but Apollo rise, her twin, her flame, the other half of her celestial balance. She did not smile, nor cry. She simply watched, with the quiet pride of a goddess who knows her part is different, but no less divine. For Artemis, the wild was her temple. Where Apollo's light struck cities, her shadows danced in groves. Where he guided oracles, she guided instincts. Where he brought clarity, she brought intuition. They were never meant to walk the same road, but they were meant to rise together. As Apollo claimed Delphi, Artemis wandered further into forests untouched by man. She whispered to wolves. She taught deer to run silently. She wrapped herself in moonlight and sharpened her silver bow. She was not forgotten in the wake of her brother's fame. In fact, mortals feared her more. They called to her not with songs, but with offerings left on stone. They saw in her the eyes of judgment, the silence before justice. Young women prayed for her protection. Hunters asked for her blessing before the chase. Midwives spoke her name in the hour of birth. And she answered, not with fire, but with presence. Where Apollo's legacy would shine through temples and prophecy, Artemis would be felt in wind and instinct, in paths not taken, in the way danger hesitated when she watched. She did not need Delphi. She had the wilderness, and as her brother stood upon sacred stone, embraced by priests and kings, Artemis raised her eyes to the moonless sky and whispered a truth only she could know. You've lit the world, brother. I'll guard its silence. And thus the balance was born. Sun and moon, voice and stillness. Twin gods, rising always, side by side. Apollo, god of music, poetry and light, so often remembered for beauty and brilliance, was not without shadows. For beneath the lyre's golden hum and the warmth of his truth burned a temper hotter than the midday sun. His wrath, when stirred, was not wild like Ares or cruel like Hera. It was precise, surgical, unforgiving. The world would soon learn. Apollo did not forget a slight. When mortals mocked the gods, they risked many things, but mocking Apollo's art was unwise beyond measure. Marsyas learned that too late. A satyr with a flute of bone, Marsyas stumbled upon the instrument once discarded by Athena. He played it well, too well. So well, in fact, that he dared challenge Apollo, the god of music, to a contest. A mortal, a goat-legged trickster, daring to duel with a god. Apollo accepted. In the contest, Marsyas played first, wild and full of soul. The forest bent toward the notes. Birds paused mid-flight. Even the stones seemed to sway. Then Apollo played. The sound was like light itself, clear, blinding, divine. But he didn't stop there. He flipped his lyre, played it upside down, and sang while strumming. Then he looked at Marsyas. "Can you do both?" he asked. Marsyas could not, and Apollo did not forgive. The god who had spared Python showed no such mercy here. He flayed the satyr alive, string by string, in a cave where the echoes still carry screams. The gods watched. Some turned away. Even Artemis the huntress frowned. But Apollo's face never changed. There was no pleasure in the punishment, only the cool certainty of justice as he saw it. Because while Apollo gave light to the world, he demanded respect in return. Delphi would be a place of truth, but also of discipline. Mortals came for wisdom, yes, but they left with warnings. Do not lie. Do not boast. Do not forget that beauty, when challenged, can burn. Apollo was the god of harmony, but disturbed that harmony, and he would become the storm. He wasn't cruel by nature, but he would never allow the world to forget that even the sun can scorch. Apollo could heal, but he could also destroy. And when mortals forgot this, he reminded them, not with fire, not with arrows, but with disease. The war at Troy had raged for years. Heroes clashed, gods took sides, and blood soaked the beaches like rain. But it wasn't swords or spears that brought the Greeks to their knees. It was Apollo's wrath. Agamemnon, the proud Greek king, had taken a captive, Chryseis, daughter of a priest who served Apollo. When her father begged for her return, offering gold and prayers, Agamemnon laughed and turned him away. That was his mistake. The priest lifted his hands to the sky. Apollo answered. He descended not in glory, but in silence, a god unseen but unmistakable. He walked the Greek camp as a shadow, his silver bow in hand, and with every pull of its string another soldier fell, not pierced by arrows, but struck by fever. Death came quietly, without fanfare. The dogs howled. The air thickened with the scent of rot. Day after day, warriors collapsed, too weak to lift their shields. Horses moaned. Fires burned untended. The army begged their seers for answers, and they all pointed to the same god, Apollo, the healer, the bright one, the protector of oracles and bringer of plagues. Agamemnon had insulted him, and now his men were paying the price. Only when the girl was returned, unharmed, unbought, did Apollo lift his hand. The sickness passed, but the memory did not. Because this was the truth of Apollo. He wasn't just light and harmony, he was balance. If mortals crossed the line, if justice was mocked, if sacred oaths were broken, he responded not in rage, but in correction. And unlike other gods, Apollo didn't scream. He acted, quiet, certain, devastating. The Greeks, afterward, continued to pray to him, for health, for music, for guidance, but always with a whisper of fear. Because they knew now what few dared to speak aloud, that the God who cured the sick could also choose not to. And when the sun disappears behind a storm, it's not the dark that frightens you, it's knowing who put it there. The war ended, the temples aged, but the names Apollo and Artemis remained, etched not just in stone, but in the rhythm of life itself. For they were never meant to be gods who ruled by force. They guided. Artemis remained in the wilderness, untouched by palace or crown. Maidens whispered her name in moonlight. Hunters left tokens at the forest's edge. Mothers prayed to her in labour, begging for mercy or strength. She answered with silence, with instinct, with presence. She did not need temples. Her sanctuary was the wild. And Apollo. He became the golden thread in civilization's tapestry. His music shaped the lyre's first song. His voice spoke through the oracle at Delphi for 1,000 years. Poets, sculptors, doctors, lawmakers. Each looked to him not for fire or miracles, but for clarity. He was not the god who forced your hand. He was the god who lit the path and left the choice to you. Together, the twins embodied balance. Where Apollo brought law, Artemis brought instinct. Where he revealed truth, she protected mystery. Where he warmed, she cooled. Where he stood in gold, she moved in silver. They never ruled Olympus, but they shaped it. More than that, they shaped mortals, because their power wasn't just in what they gave, but in what they withheld. Artemis never tamed the wild. She let it remain wild. Apollo never answered every prayer. He let mortals question. And through that, they created something rare among gods. Growth. They weren't just protectors. They were mirrors, reflecting back the best and worst in those who worshipped them. And to this day, when a child feels the thrill of moonlight on skin, when a musician finds melody in silence, when a seeker kneels at a crossroads, asking not for rescue but for insight, the twins are still there, one watching from the trees, the other humming just behind the sun. Because gods may fade from temples, but they do not fade from the heart, especially not the ones born in exile, who chose to become something more than worshipped. They became part of us, forever.